All right, everyone. Welcome to the Q&A for a Sexplanation at the 10th Annual Seattle Asian American Film Festival. My name is Annie Kuo, and for about 4 years, I was Public Relations Director at SAAFF. I'm now a Public Relations Mentor. And I am really excited to jump on to the Q&A for a Sexplanation because my previous work involved obstetrics and gynecology and urology. So when I saw that the spot was open, I leapt at it because I love ball jokes and stuff like that. So let's welcome a Sexplanation director and star, Alex Liu.
Hey, everyone.
As well as his college buddy and writer and producer of the film, Neri.
How's it going?
They're joining us from both the East Coast, the New York State, and
I'm from San Francisco,
Bay Area. Yeah, so welcome y'all to the virtual festival.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, we love it. We're so glad that we could screen your film. It was awesome, so fun, very funny. I was telling Leo earlier that the group of folks that I watched it with, a group of young widowed parents, really appreciated the insight because we're now fielding these questions solo.
That means so much.
Yeah, and so this really helped inform, the conversations that we're going to be having with our kids, because they're questions like, so there's 2 kids. Does that mean that you had sex with mom like 2 times? Like, or like for 20 years. So I wanted to ask, first off, how the 2 of you met. I heard in college, but how did you come together to do this film?
Yeah, I think it was a natural process of, just getting to know each other, becoming friends. Post-college, I mean, I don't want to put too many words in Leo's mouth, but we both had these creative ambitions, I think. We were working in tech marketing. And, this thing that's kind of been an albatross around our necks, sexuality, right? We're both queer. So sex and sexuality has been kind of like this very tricky, anxiety-ridden kind of path to navigate for us. And as we got older and older, it still was not easy, not as easy as we thought it should be after coming out for a decade plus. And so I just kind of started throwing things onto the internet around, I have this YouTube channel called Science of Sin, and it was just like silly sketch comedy around sex education. And Leo was interested, and at first it was just like, come here, hold this light, come here, be an extra, come here, be in this scene with me, I need help, I can't do it on my own. And through that, I think we discovered we work well together. We have kind of a similar sensibility when it comes to humor, when it comes to how you make the medicine go down. And so, yeah, from there, we had this idea for this movie, and after, 7 years, this is the result.
Wow, it took 7 years.
Yeah, from the first dollar raise to the first screening was a full thing, was 7 years. Yeah.
Oh, so a real labor of love.
Yeah.
Definitely. Wow. Leo, okay, I was telling Leo, Alex, you haven't heard this yet, that I spied on a few other festival interviews that y'all did. So from that, I learned that originally y'all were going to take a more scientific approach to, okay, we're going to educate folks about human sexuality and, kind of describe things to, we're going to do the sex education we wish we had from a scientific perspective.
Right.
But then somehow in these early conversations, the idea to include, Alex, your human narrative, got inserted in there, that this might be a more compelling approach. So I'm curious, when that conversation, maybe Leo, you could speak to that initially.
Yeah.
About in your creative process.
I mean, Alex I joined the project maybe about a year into the filming process, and I think he'd already had a few interviews under his belt. So when he was describing to me what he was envisioning, it was a documentary about sex, and it was pretty, all-encompassing at first. And Alex having a journalism background, it was a pretty focused, data-driven, like analytical piece. So, and I mean, all that stuff was very, very captivating, and it still is. I think it'd still be very captivating all on its own. But what was happening behind the scenes was Alex was giving me his sales pitch, or his driving force also would be and he describes it as his white hot rage at not having had appropriate sex education, and how much pain and suffering could have been prevented had he had just a little bit of guidance growing up. Had he given, I don't know, 13-year-old Alex some messages of like, it's okay and this is normal. And I shared in that fury and anger. So it's like, you have this really compelling behind the scenes argument. And I'm like, well, we both kind of came to the conclusion, like, well, why isn't this in the film? This is such a, you need to understand why you, Alex, are specifically he's our porter through the film. Why are you not sharing the story? So through a lot of vulnerabilities and a lot of exchanging of stories, I kind of think we came to the same point of the personal is so well, it is very specific to us. I think it's also a very universal, it's a universal story that would kind of get people on board to buy into the themes of the movie. So I would say, while a year sounds like a long time for us, being 7 years is a long time, it was pretty early into the process. And then after that, we kind of just begin to see a little bit more clearly the pieces that we needed to collect to make this film. I don't know, Alex, if you feel.
Yeah, I mean, I think once we kind of, when you, especially for your first documentary, you're just so scared you don't have enough to begin the editing process. But then once you start the editing process, you realize you have way too much, and there wasn't anything to hang the interviews on, right? It's just like a bunch of really interesting interviews, but they are strung together. It doesn't necessarily cohere into what was important to us to make an actual entertaining story, right? Because I think if you don't have that entertainment factor up front, how can you expect people to follow through unless they're already incredibly passionate about the topic? Yeah. And so we thought, okay, let's tell a story, and it became clear, through conversation, this is ostensibly my story, but speaking with Leo, a lot of his stories in there, things that we connected with, that we did feel were universal, made it, and we made sure that when we told our story, hopefully people can see a little bit of themselves in each piece.
Yeah, absolutely. It definitely was universal because of these themes that even the experts defined as universal sexual behaviors. More people watch porn, even your mom. I saw that little grimace that you made. And we're gonna get to your mom and dad.
Think about that, everyone.
Yeah, or that masturbation is like the most universal sexual behavior. Like, like speak the truth. I wanted to also just comment that I found it so refreshing that there are two Asian American men behind this project, because let's face it, on the spectrum of what society often sort of stereotypes as sexual beings, Asian American men don't always make it to the top of that list, which I have a real problem with. But at the same time, the fact that the two of you are from the queer community and are have been willing to embrace your sexuality now for a couple of decades since college, and be open about the journey and the struggles and the former place that used to be in. Talk about a personal journey of your own, coming from struggle and darkness to now shedding light on this for everyone.
I appreciate that so much. You have no idea. We talked a lot about that at the beginning, that we were very aware of that fact. And one of the things, to kind of expand on that, one of the things that in the end I'm so glad we did is putting my parents in two scenes, because I also think it's like, you rarely see immigrant families talking about this in media. You rarely see kind of sex being something that can be spoken about freely among Asian or immigrant families. And just seeing that they're that we contain multitudes, right? We're all those things, and so to put a little bit of that in the world has been just a real joy to watch.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I identified so much with this because of my own upbringing, like asking my mother after seeing the little like striped dots around the insertion in intercourse. And you know, asking her what this was, and I says, how do you make a baby? And she says, if you sleep with, you know, in my case, she said, if you sleep with a boy. So because my brother and I had sleepovers at our age, you know, back then, I would make him sleep in the rocking chair. But much later, you know, when I was able to take the sex ed class, I learned more, but it was still very lacking. Like the film covers, there's such a focus on abstinence and and you know, sexually transmitted diseases as opposed to the pleasure of intercourse and what it can add to, you know, just being well-balanced human beings out there. You know, and self-love and all of that. I am curious about that conversation you had with your parents, since we're already there. First of all, what did you find out about your dad's engagement?
A great question. Yeah. So I think my parents met, as much as he was willing to tell me, when my parents met kind of in this Asian American community of college students in the DC area in the 70s. And so I think I don't know, there weren't that many Asians in that area back then, and I think, you know, my dad came over after the Civil Rights Immigration Act of '65, I think, and so there wasn't much of a dating pool according to him, and so it was just assumed that the girl he was with in college was going to be the girl he was going to marry, and then my mom came in the picture, and then they were married like 4 weeks later. So it was very quick. Yeah.
And know you know, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah. He's like, I'm not going with the kind of cookie cutter of convenience. I'm gonna go for love.
Right.
For love.
Well, sorry, I'm like, wow, interesting. So in this update of the story, your mom is the one that
I don't know if there was overlap, but I don't think my dad ever saw, according to him, never saw her as a viable partner.
Okay, phew, good thing that he dodged that bullet, or maybe mutually, both of them. I just love that you got your parents on the couch, and then how relatively open they were by that point on camera.
Yes. Oh yeah. And I think my coming out around 18, you know, it's almost 20 years later, you know, we couldn't have had that conversation, you know, 15, 20 years ago.
Yeah.
But because, you know, I'm very lucky that when I came out of the closet, their first instinct was to make sure I was okay, rather than any, you know, my dad still has, I think, discomfort around the idea of two men being intimate. But, you know, they got me into therapy. They started to look for local gay people in the community to show me there was a life that was possible, full of meaning and love. You know, and so it's been great journey to get us to this point. And I think they clearly are just so supportive of understanding that this is something I kind of need to do. It's kind of this thing that I needed to get out of my system to express in some way. And even though they didn't know what was going to happen or how the footage would be used, I just feel so grateful that they were willing to sit there and sit uncomfortably through all my questions.
Yeah, and grandma too.
Yeah.
Credit. So you've got like 3 generations right there, taking a delayed conversation, but one that seemingly was inspired by the journey that you took together as a family.
Yeah. And I kind of, I don't know if we've ever had that conversation without the film. I feel like I almost needed the lens or the filter of making a film to actually have that conversation that we needed to have. But it's just been it's paid off so much that you know we don't talk about sex a lot in our day-to-day, but it's it just feels like there's less we're hiding with each other, which is just so nice to have in a relationship.
Yeah, totally. You instinctively answered the question I was going to ask, which was about how the conversation you had on film with your parents and grandma compared to when you came out to them in high school. Back in, was it high school?
Yeah, it was just my senior year of high school. I mean, they could tell I was depressed. They could tell something was going on. And it finally all just came out. And yeah, it was, I mean, I don't want to sugarcoat it. It was difficult. There were lots of confusion on both sides. We didn't know how to process it as a family, and so luckily I just recommend everyone to get into some sort of therapy, cognitive behavioral therapy, if you have the privilege to afford it, because that was what we needed to process what was going on. My mom has a PhD in psychology, so that probably was a little leg up on it for us. Yeah. So it was just, there's so much, I think, that you don't realize you're not saying because you've repressed it for so long. It's like the air you breathe, it's just part of your day-to-day. You don't realize how numb you are to it. But once it comes out and it starts just flooding out of you, you really do. It's not easy. It's very difficult. But if you can get to that place, every day, if you can open up a little bit more, the work is just so worth it, because the relationships you have are just, as you see in the film, it's just so much more meaningful and rich.
Absolutely. Yeah, I really respect what you said about encouraging everyone to look into therapy, because it's like the healthy people who pursue therapy.
Yeah.
Talking things out rather than bottling it up,
Right.
it's the healthy thing to do. And speaking of which, when we talk about breaking tension, I know, again, spying on other interviews, that humor was a way to break the tension of all this, kind of explanations, maybe all the talking heads, in between the many interviews. And I heard that there's a lot of interviews that were left on the cutting room floor, but that I'm super curious about, because the ones that you did include in the film were highly effective and like being threaded together for the storytelling. But what was the process of brainstorming and infusing humor into the film like? Because it felt like every couple of minutes there was like a little, rib here, or we were just talking about how in the background, Alex, you've got the building that was used for like the explosion scene. I'm curious about how you guys did that too, because is it like Baby Alive dolls where you just like push down on something and it's like...
Yeah, we had an amazing production designer, Elizabeth Wittersick, who our first, I wish we could publish this brief that we had to her, which was like, we want an exploding penis volcano, we want a vulva, we want like all these different things. She was amazing in terms of turning that around and making it look great. But and Leo, Leo, he's just such a keen eye for finding the little kind of nuggets of humor, but also just like engagement. I think, I don't know, you want to talk about your process, Leo, around how we kind of work through that?
Sure, yeah. Alex is being very generous. I think we a big part of us working together, I think we have similar sensibilities, and I think at least a similar view of the dark and the light, and knowing that they can't exist without each other. So I think very, very early on, we knew that in order for the topic of sex, which could be like, even in the movie we go into, it has a lot of loaded shame and a lot of weight, and it could be very depressing and heavy. And we even talked about suicide a little bit, but that through it all, sex is like this very lively, exuberant, joyful thing. So how do we kind of bridge the two?
Yeah.
And how do we lean into the awkwardness, right? It could be, sex could be so awkward. And for me, I've always been an awkward human being. And I think my weapon is that I can weaponize my awkwardness into humor. Mm-hmm. So I think just trying to find the moments where we can laugh at ourselves or laugh at the situation as a moment for engagement with the audience, so that we can get them to be more open to listening to the message, which could be a little scary. We kind of just to clear the awkward, to clear the scary, and just like to make it an okay space to live in, and just take things for what they are. Yeah, just to bring some chuckles too is always a delight. Yeah.
Well, it was it was very effective, and I thought y'all storyboarded it really well.
Yeah, I think like the best definition of humor that I've heard because it's kind of like there's one of those things that's like, how do you define what's funny? You know, it just is, right? It's one of those most pure emotional reactions that's unfiltered, right? It's uncontrollable. It just comes out of you. And the best thing I can think of is it's this release of tension by speaking a truth that you knew, you know, deep down, but had never been expressed before, right? Like the best comedians kind of do that. And because this is such a tension-laden topic, the more we can get humor to get people to realize, like, it's great also seeing this in a theater, because then the people around start to realize, like, oh wow, people are laughing. Everyone feels this way. Everyone, all these things I thought were so scary to hide in me. It's funny because we're all in the exact same, you know, shame soup, as it were. So we just felt humor was the way to get people to be more open about that.
Yeah, and it makes the film very accessible.
Yeah, I also want to add, it's kind of interesting, this idea of like, so we have been fortunate to watch the film with live audience, with live audiences in different cities, which has also been terrifying, by the way. To see how people are going to watch your film, and because I'm like studying the audience as they're watching the film, which also makes me creepy. But it's like you kind of need permission, right? Like just like in the film, you need permission to talk about things. In the film, people needed permission almost to laugh about certain things, certain audiences, and then once one person breaks the like, yes, this is intended to be funny, and when they realize it's intended to be funny and start laughing, then it kind of like releases the restraint, and people just kind of start enjoying themselves a little more. So like that permissiveness.
It's okay to laugh about beating off in an MRI machine.
That was the goal. Hopefully people find that funny. Yeah.
Yeah. I hope there was like no restraint there, because it's like so awkward / like otherworldly.
Yeah. Totally surreal. Totally surreal.
Yeah. That awkward laughter comes out rolling. I was wondering too about the question of, when we're talking about defining humor, there's a part in the movie where you ask experts across the board to define sex. And I'm curious, at the end of all of this 7 years of deep diving into how would you two describe sex? How would you define sex? Oh, hot seat.
Yeah, I think it's something that, I think the best thing that the movie has done when it comes to my definition of sex is that it's something that I should always be interrogating, that there is no, it's kind of like health, right? Like what someone in the 1900s would have thought was healthy, we would think is totally unhealthy today, right?
Yeah.
The definition of sex is kind of a moving target in the same way, because culture changes, you know, you change, your body changes, everything is changing. So what you think is or isn't sex, or what you think sex is for or not for, should always be something that you're interrogating. But I think at the broadest level, you know, pleasurable connections of all kind are part of this sexual milieu. You know, it's that, you know, I've had conversations with people where we've never talked, and it's been such an engaging, beautiful conversation where I feel like I'm being seen in a new way, or we're connecting in a way I've never connected with the person. And then I've been like, you know, fully penetrated by someone, and that conversation, I would say, is much more sexual and much more engaging and much more beautiful. And so I think that's where I'm at now. I often say that, like, I feel like I'm a 3-year-old, or I'm like learning a new language when it comes to sex, that this is still very fresh for me. Yeah. But it's been so much more of an expansive experience, seeing, you know, it's almost like being born again in a way that I can see the world in such a new, fun way, that this thing, I'm constantly uncovering ways that I repress myself when it comes to sexuality, conversations with almost anyone, you know. And so it's been great to interrogate that and realize, you know, like, oh, so what if, you know, this could be a sexual experience, and you can run from that and hide from it, or you can lean into it and enjoy it. And as long as, you know, as it's consensual, I think that's I'd rather lean into it, because it just makes life so much more worth living.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I guess I have to answer. I guess I'll say that I probably boil it down to, like, sex is, the first thing it's not static, and it's ever evolving, and it's about exploration, and hopefully I can find fun in the exploration.
Yes. Awesome. I know we're running out of time, but I just have maybe 1.5 more questions. And
Great. Yeah. Sorry, I keep talking too much. Sorry about that. I get very passionate. Yeah.
It's totally worth it. I wonder, in terms of say like that breakfast or brunch scene where you have the friends around the table, how did you choose the personalities to gather around the table, and then ultimately the experts that you did include in the film? How did you decide to include the ones you did and leave the other ones behind?
Yeah, it's for the people, the friend group, the brunch friend group, we did kind of pick, like I said, like the smartest people we know, like, and not only smartest, but the people who we know have thought very hard about these things, like Danielle, the doctor in there, you know, she's a family doctor who often talks about how sad it is, you know, when it comes to sex and sexuality, how her patients often are just so afraid to talk to her about those things. And so Devin, our good friend Devin, he's just you know, you can sit down with him, and then immediately he can think of the nuances of how society and culture and science all intertwine. So we pick the people who in our general lives have gotten us to think differently about things, and that's just been, and those are the best brunches, right? The ones where you have people with different views and you can talk about a topic, and it's not about celebrities, or those are fun too, but you know it's about something bigger. Those are the people that we kind of picked.
Sexual conversation about
yeah. And then I think, and we wanted to also have different perspectives in terms of race, gender, orientation, all those things. And as far as the people we picked, I mean, there are so many that, like, we wanted to do, we went to actually the Lion Martin Health Center in San Francisco, which is a trans health center. So all the practitioners are trans, all the patients are trans. We had this great conversations with the nurse practitioner about that, but it became so obvious that all our interviews are 3 minutes, and you just can't do that topic justice in 3 minutes.
Yeah.
There was a Mormon bishop we talked to he's really, having a kind of existential crisis about what sexuality means and how it's being talked about in the Mormon church. But it just simply wasn't, it was also kind of one of those bigger conversations that needed a little more nuance. And the great thing about doing this as the partner, for sure, I think if my problem is that but also maybe it could be good, is that I want to talk to as many people possible, get as many interviews, get as much. Leo is exactly what you want in terms of like keeping us focused in terms of what's the story, what's the narrative, how does it fit. I don't know, you want to talk about that, Leo?
I don't know. I almost think it's like, in general life, it's insane to think that I'm the organized person to keep us on track for narrative.
He's running on time.
I think in other aspects of my life, I'm not. But for me, it was always like, we just had such a wealth of riches when it came to interviews. At a certain point, I just started to, in the background, get nervous. I'm like, okay, well, let's just start like putting pen to paper and see where the story starts taking us. Once we start putting the pieces of the puzzle together and see if they fit. And I do think once we did start that process, which we could have started earlier, but I do understand the want to collect more pieces because they might be shinier and might open up an entire new a new narrative. But once we started putting down the pieces, it became kind of clear how they were starting to fit, and the themes that kept coming up, that were being repeated by multiple subjects. It became kind of a lot more clear where the narrative was heading. So yeah, I don't know if anyone else is watching and they're in the filmmaking process. It was our first time, so it was a big learning experience. But I would say, like, start putting pen to paper early, and then if it's not working, then continue to explore topics.
Start cutting your footage right away. Like the second it's done, the next day you should watch and cut it, because that would have saved us a lot of time.
It's a very organic process, but obviously thoughtful and strategic.
Yeah.
How it gets done. I want to just mention to the audience that if they didn't know, that Alex, you kind of came into the project of sex education from your 2 YouTube channels, right? That cover sex and drugs.
Yeah. So that we have Science and Sin, and then I did something pairing with the AIDS Healthcare Foundation around gay male men who have sex with men, sexual health. Yeah.
and that you studied molecular toxicology at UC Berkeley.
I did, yes.
Which is maybe where the initial scientific.
For sure, yeah.
And Leo, were you in the same program, or did you guys meet in the dorm or something?
No. I was nowhere near that same program. I like graduated by cobbling together a major about environmental policy.
Oh wow, but that's still kind of science-ish.
Yeah, it was definitely
more liberal artsy.
Yeah.
We met more through like the UC Berkeley Gaysian kind of community. That's kind of where we are.
That's, by the way, if you haven't read this great book called Gaysia, I highly
No.
Oh, I haven't.
Okay.
It's like a travel anthology where the author, he goes through Asia and he, talks about the drag queens in Bangkok and,
Oh, that's great. If there are any gay Asian men who are watching this and you haven't been to Asia, Bangkok, Taipei, probably the best known as far as being gay, and you're dealing with your racial identity, go to Asia. I think that's where you realize so much. That's where I realized so much of how like the culture, being in the United States and being a minority within minority, not being seen, not being sexualized or sexualized in a way that feels weird. When you go to Asia, it's like you realize, oh my gosh, like I'm carrying all this stuff from just being in the United States. Like it has nothing to do with me. It has to do with the culture I was brought up in. And that's just been such also a liberating thing to do. If you're struggling with sexuality, I highly recommend that.
I feel like that's a film.
Maybe, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'd love to follow any future work that you're doing. So what's the project that you might be kind of eyeballing or have your hands in right now?
Yeah, I Taiwan is at the top of my list. When all the restrictions come out, that's my first place I'm gonna go.
Nice. With a camera. Because you never know, right? How about you, Leo?
Wait, are you asking what projects we're working on?
Yeah.
Oh, great. I'm like, am I going to Taiwan too then?
You should. I would love you to come to Taiwan.
Projects. I think Alex and I are kicking around some ideas for some future projects around maybe sticking around the themes of sex, but also maybe just verging into conversations that are generally difficult to have as a society and how to get to them in a more level and comical way. So yeah, those are the kind of themes we're kind of kicking around, being a little vague, but yeah.
Well, being a little vague, but that the suspense will be worth it, I'm sure, when it's done. And I'm glad you're sticking with the combo that works, the formula that works.
We hopefully
represented voices and topics to bring to bear.
Well, thank you.
Humor and intelligence. So thank you so much for the conversation. Congratulations on a beautifully done and very highly entertaining and informative film, A Sexplanation.
Thank you.
Thanks to anyone watching. Thank you.
Yes,
we want to thank the audience for joining us for the conversation. And if you would like to watch more films, we are showing them at the Seattle Asian American Film Festival, March 3rd through the 13th. And you can you can actually get to the link at bit.ly. I still don't know how to say that.
bit.ly
/SAAFF, SAAFF, for Seattle Asian American Film Festival 2022. Can you believe we're already here? Thank you so much, everyone, especially Leo and Alex and the audience.
Yeah, thank you. And if people have been asking, after they leave the festival, if you follow us on social at A Sexplanation, all the platforms, we'll have some great news, hopefully by the end of the month, about where people can see this more widely.
Oh, nice, awesome. Okay, thanks so much for the plug, and we're gonna end here. But we appreciate everyone joining us, and go out and have some good sex.
Yes.
Bye.
Thank you.